3 counties, 24 cities, working together, accomplishing more than any of us could alone. Whether your roots run generations deep, or you recently moved to Greater Portland, you are a part of Metro, the nation's only regional government elected by the people. Planning for the future, preserving what we love. Let's keep our region thriving for decades to come.
I'm Laura Lepley, a Metro Park Ranger. Here at Oxbow Park, safety is our #1 priority, not only for our guests, but for our staff members. I'm at the Welcome Center and you're at the Regional Center. The council chambers are located on the 3rd floor. In the event of a fire or fire alarm, please exit through the door in the northeast corner of the room. Go down the stairway to the 2nd floor, exit through the main entrance by the reception desk, and gather in the courtyard outside that entrance. In the event of a medical or fire emergency, please call 911 and notify the security agent at the reception desk. The nearest defibrillator is mounted on the steps leading from the reception desk down to Grand Avenue. Thank you, and come visit us at Oxbow Park.
Yes, Councilor Simpson.
Present.
Councilor Gonzalez.
Present. Good morning. Happy New Year.
Councilor Nolan.
Present. Hello.
Councilor Wong. Present. Councilor Lewis.
Present.
Councilor Rosenthal.
Present.
Council President Peterson.
Present. Thank you. And we'll move on to public communication. I'll now open public communication on non-agenda items. George, will you please describe to the audience our procedures that we will use for public communication on non-agenda items?
President Peterson, I apologize. It's your first script state of the year. You can skip.
I wondered, but I was just gonna roll. We will close that because we normally don't do public communication on non-agenda items at a work session. And we will move on to Parks and Nature Roadmap Project Update. Our meeting today does consist of 2 Parks and Nature items. Parks and Nature is in our region's DNA. It's important to our community, our environment, and our economy. Voters love parks and nature in this region and have supported 6 initiatives over the last 30 years here at Metro. This council continues to affirm that parks and nature is a matter of regional significance. The voters have trusted Metro to continue to deliver on the promises of our bonds and levies, and one of the ways we achieve that is by looking into the future and plan for what our region needs. Not just now, but also 20, 30, or 50 years. Successful conservation work is intergenerational, and today we have an opportunity to discuss how we add to our regional story, protecting nature for future generations. So, why don't we bring up John Blasher and Beth Miller. Kick us off on this conversation. Thank you.
Great. Good morning, Council President Peterson,
Morning.
councilors. Excited to be with you all in this new year. John Blasher, Parks and Nature Director, joined by Ben Collins, Teaching Funding Program Manager. We have some slides. Great. Hope you enjoyed the holiday season and success. Thanks for having us here to kick off this conversation about how we can build on our legacy Parks and Nature, the Parks and Nature Roadmap process. So we'll provide also after this an update on the Willamette Cove Master Plan and project. So really appreciate bringing these 2 interrelated topics for your review and direction today. And we'll start by providing an overview of the roadmap process of update Parks and Nature's work over the next decade. And then we'll provide a specific example of looking at a big picture look at the priorities at like Willamette Cove and the work that's happening there. So want to thank you all again for your continued leadership and direction on all things parks, trails, natural areas, which continues to be an area of strength across the region for Metro. One thing that's remained constant during these turbulent times is that voters continue to stand up for nature. Last fall, voters in Portland approved the Portland Parks levy increase. So we know that the region's park trails and natural areas are essential factors in bringing and keeping residents to the region across Greater Portland, which in turn supports regional content. Go to the next slide, please. So today's an opportunity to introduce this roadmap process, which is designed to help council in thinking through about the best ways to help build on the legacy of Metro's Parks and Nature's role in the region. This project describes a process to leverage a collection of planning projects that deliver the following outcomes for council consideration. Want to ensure that the Parks and Nature System Plan is updated to meet the moment we're in accurately by capturing agency policy, service priorities, guiding values, and measures of success. We also want to look at Parks and Nature funding strategies, including a pathway to potential levy replacement before the current levy expires in June of 2028. So today we want to make sure that we're on the right track in putting together this process and doing the necessary staff work to support future policy discussions with council. We know that the council is also balancing multiple immediate priorities and that this topic is more of an intermediate timeline. However, our goal today is so that council has a chance to review, affirm the process, assumptions, and tools that are being developed. And getting that affirmation will allow staff to continue to work so that we're ready at the right time to bring back more to council for consideration when it comes to updates to the system plan and future local option levy. So we want to hear from you today on some of the following things. Is the staff work underway now and it's planned meeting your expectations for what you'll need? Is there any additional support for future policy conversations that you need in the next 2 years in terms of information or other things that we can collect? And are some of the assumptions that we're bringing to meeting your expectations? So go to the next slide, please. As part of this, we wanted to cover a few topics to help support this. I want to provide some background and context on Metro's growing role as a parks and nature provider, planner, and convener over the last 3 decades. I want to introduce this roadmap process and some of the ways that we're looking to help take the system plan, looking at needs and opportunities. We also want to preview how we'll be coming back to council for continued discussions and conversations and get input on any of that. Next slide, please. So Metro plays a unique role in the regional system when it comes to parks, trails, natural areas. And we found that we focus on 3 core services that we provide. One is protected and restored lands. 2 is the regional parks and nature experiences. And 3 is community and park provider grants and funding. Let's go back to the community. So with those supportive voters in the region over 30 years, we've been able to protect close to 20,000 acres of natural areas and parks. We provide unique nature experiences at 34 destination sites, boat launches, and historic cemeteries. And also have provided over $180 million in funding to park providers and community organizations in support of local nature priorities. We also serve as a regional convener, regional trails network. So a lot of great things. Next slide. So what we're going to do is go through a few maps quickly. We've also printed these out for anybody that's here that wants to take a look at these. But what they're going to show is a little recap over the last 30 years of how the portfolio has grown for protecting and restoring lands, how it's grown for providing nature experiences through destination sites, and how we've also invested in other communities and park providers. So this is just an opportunity to help show a little bit of, how we've grown over time. And yeah, this first slide here is showing, you can see this dark dots are what we got from the county in 1994, Multnomah County. The green dots represent that first bond measure over time, how much land was acquired. So the green dots represent over 8,000 acres with the 1995 bond. We can go to the next slide. In the 06 bond, added another 6,000 acres. Next slide. Added another 1,500 acres so far in the 2019 bond. So we're managing now close to 200,000 acres, 20,000 acres, excuse me, and 100 natural area sites. For our destination sites, we also stepped into that role as a park provider in 1990 with the transfer of the Smith and Bybee wetlands in North Portland. So go to the next slide. this is showing now some of our destination sites. You see in green in 95, we were managing these sites from the county. So we just celebrated or recognized 35 years as a program. When we started in November of 1990, of course, we all know that one of the top selling albums was MC Hammer, Please Hammer Don't Hurt 'Em, and Janet Jackson, Rhythm Nation. So we've come a ways. We've come a ways. I think Fear of a Black Planet from Public Enemy was also one of those top albums, and Madonna. So things have changed and some things have stayed the same. We love these places and we've had opportunities to help grow on them. So go to the next slide. You can see that we've added in the 2000s 3 other nature parks. And so from inheriting that system in 94, we've added about 3 nature parks per decade. And so we continue to grow. And not only does that include nature parks, but boat launches, 14 cemeteries, a golf course, historic farm, and a lot of other things that we have. They create some unique opportunities of how we manage it. So go to the next slide. See how we've added some more across the region in Killen Wetlands up in Banks area and Tenemo Bluff in Working City, Farmington Paddle Launch. Next slide. And most recently through the 2019 bond, we opened Chehalis Ridge Nature Park, Washington County, and Newell Creek Canyon in Oregon City. So it's a little just reminder of how the portfolio's grown over time and how we've taken on more land to manage, more nature parks providing these experiences. Next slide. And this shows all the local investments that we've made across the region. So it actually doesn't show all of the most recent, but this represents $180 million of investments through the 95, 06, and 2019 bond measure, which included local share and capital grants, and then also the nature neighborhoods grants as well. So as you can see, there's almost no part of the region that hasn't been touched and impacted by this investment through bond and levy dollars. So a unique role again of protecting, restoring lands, providing nature experiences, providing funding across the region. Next slide. So growing is not without its challenges, and maintaining this growing system over time, especially as we've increased acreage and our nature parks have been challenging as those sites have grown. Expectations, some of the operating dollars per acre have not kept up. So the blue line represents the overall acres and nature parks added. The yellow line is the operating funds per dollar per acre. And so some of that has been with either relatively flat or decreased levy and general fund and overall just portfolio growth. Despite this, we continue to look at ways to how do we operate efficiently and manage these sites in the most effective way possible. Next slide, please. So another way to tell our story is thinking about the different sites. See on the top left is Scouters Mountain in Happy Valley, bottom left is Oxbow, and on the right is Chehalis Ridge Nature Park. So we had the opportunity to go on some visits with you all this past fall and appreciate that. But one way to talk about the story is thinking of the different sites and some of the things that came up there. The story of Oxbow is when we inherited an aging site from Willamette County in the 90s and have invested in acquisitions to build and sustain a landscape scale protected area that supports our region's core values, water quality, climate resilience, fish and wildlife, special places that we've all taken care of. We also heard from counselors directly from members of the Indigenous community about how Oxbow is a vital backdrop for community and cultural connection like Salmon Homecoming. At Scouters Mountain, we heard a little bit from planning manager Rod Botanic that described the drive through Happy Valley and up to Scouters as a decompression zone. You also heard the story and saw firsthand of the growing community around Scouters and how without the purchases and development of this nature park, the entire site would be covered in homes. So how do we balance that opportunity to think long-term? Scouters is an example of what we've seen at Cooper Mountain in Beaverton or Mount Tabor in Portland as over time, this growth of the region needs to balance with places to live, places to do business, with places to go out and enjoy nature, feel that connection. And then many of you also helped to open Chehalis Ridge in 2022. It's one of the jewels of the portfolio that was made possible over many years through the passage of several bonds and the 2019 bond. which you helped champion to help finish that. So had this opportunity to take care of what we have, protect nature as we grow, and then pass the baton because we recognize that I think Jonathan Saul, our science manager, put really well about the general efforts, generational efforts to both protect and restore priority habitat is a relay race. And each generation does their part to continue the work and pass the baton on to the next generation. So try to leave each group in a better place. So that's another way to look at some of the work that we do. Next slide, please. Now, none of this work could happen without council direction and support. And you have helped build through the 2019 bond measure, most recently in the 2022 levy, an opportunity to focus on people and place through the development of criteria around racial equity, climate resilience, and community engagement, created new programs like large-scale community visions and regional trails funding prioritization, investing in the community choice grant program, which is a really unique way of providing the community more voice and voting for the different projects that they wanted to see take place. And then also supporting and funding vision at Lone Fir Memorial and Willamette Cove. So you all have had a lot recently in helping to shape the future and the current experience for folks. We really appreciate the time you took at tours last fall and all the briefings and all the feedback. So some of the things that came up in those recent conversations, what we heard was the appreciation for Metro's role as a unique nature provider, the importance of taking care of what we have at existing sites where we welcome people, and ensuring that parks and nature investments have positive impacts on access, economy, climate, and equity. So with all that kind of backdrop, reminder, and sort of grounding, I'd like to transition now to talk more about this actual roadmap project, update system plan, and explore potential service needs and funding opportunities. So I'll pass it to Beth Cohen, who's the project manager for the roadmap process, to walk through everything.
Awesome. Thanks, John. Good morning, President Peterson and councilors. Does this sound okay? Okay. I'm Beth Cohen. I'm she, her pronouns, strategic funding program manager, and really glad to be with you today to launch a conversation on the vision for Metro's Parks and Nature System. John was talking in poetry, and I'll be a little more prose, get into some of the nitty gritty of the process that we're looking at ahead. So the roadmap process is designed to update our system plan and a future levy to ensure we can continue to deliver on the outcomes that you just heard about and meet needs and opportunities in our changing needs. We will go to the next slide. Thanks. So as you probably know, the Parks and Nature System Plan is council policy direction adopted in 2016 that charted a 25-year vision for the department's role and function in the region. And in doing so, to better support our partners and strengthen relationships. Back away. Okay. Complementing, is that okay? Thanks. The broader regional network of parks, natural areas, and trails. When it was adopted, it was meant to be revisited in 5 to 7 years, and we know lots has changed since then. Like other park providers across the region, Metro is working to keep up with demand on our developed sites like Oxbow and Blue Lake in a budget-constrained environment, while also trying to stay ahead of evolving land management challenges like extreme weather, invasive species, and wildfire risk. In that same timeframe, Metro as an agency has formalized commitments to racial equity through our Sporetti plan, has developed a robust tribal affairs program, and continues to prioritize commitments to ADA and universal accessibility. Finally, we anticipate needing to renew our 5-year operating levy before it expires in June 2028. Fulfilling voters' expectations means that our natural areas portfolio and operational needs have grown substantially, which strains the operating revenue currently available, which from the levy is about $19 million a year from our levy rate at 9.6 cents per $1,000 of assessed value. I'll just spend the next couple slides describing our foundational assumptions, some of the information we're compiling, and proposed high-level milestones that we're proposing as part of the process with you today. And our focus for your discussion today is to hear whether and how you think this process aligns with your expectations, what's missing, and just want to emphasize that, we've heard you ask for us to come early on in the process as we're forming and norming. And we're definitely doing that. So we're kind of sharing what we have, want to hear your direction at this early phase. Okay, next slide. So as we kick off this work, we just want to highlight some of our guiding assumptions governing how we're approaching the roadmap project. And so one of the specific questions we'll be looking for your feedback on is whether these general assumptions look right to you or what you'd adjust. So first off, like time window that we're looking at. Important to note that the roadmap is asking us through the roadmap, we're basically looking at a short to medium term look ahead, intended to help set our path for the next 10 to 15 years out. But want to note at the same time, this is happening during future vision, and we're going to stay engaged and make sure that we're aligned with the North Stars that come out of that process. So second, we're preparing to explore with you a range of service and portfolio scenarios and respective funding models to ensure that our system plan can reflect your updated priorities, but also match those priorities with available funding that would make up any future levy. And just a couple notes about our assumptions about these scenarios. We're assuming that they'll reflect the core services that you heard John talk about, protected and restored lands, regional parks and nature experiences, and community funding and programs and convening. But we'll be designed to let council explore opportunities and trade-offs with dialing up or down within those service areas, and also thinking about ways to address emerging needs and opportunities. In addition, the scenarios we evaluate with you could range from contracting our service delivery, assuming no levy or straight renewal, to meeting our current service delivery expectations for a growth scenario based on either a levy replacement with an increased rate or some other scenarios that you give us direction to explore. Finally, as we think about investment measure planning, we need to be focused on tools to build to success. The two that are on this slide are basically, we need to always be making a strong case for the need, urgency, and opportunity for our work in the region. What's our value proposition that we're bringing? And then we know that we can't do this work alone, and we're going to be bringing allies, partners, and coalition members with us along the way. Okay, next slide. Awesome. Okay, so we've seen, and you've heard about today, our Parks and Nature path over the last 30 plus years has delivered significant results. There's a lot of text on this slide, but what we wanted to show you in a little more detail is the information that we're updating as part of this roadmap process. And we feel like this information is designed to help us build on and continue that important work. So this slide shows kind of like 3 buckets of projects and areas of information that we're currently in the process of updating and compiling as part of the roadmap. So taken together, we believe that this information can deepen your understanding about the current status of our system and support your discussions about future service priorities, as well as be helpful as we think about engaging with stakeholders and partners in the next year plus. So I'll just give you a quick overview of those 3 categories. So the first one is better defining and describing the services we deliver on protected and restored lands, regional parks, and community funding and grants, but digging in to talk about the cost of providing those services, strengthening our inventory of our natural and built assets, and our understanding of what's our unfunded liabilities in our system, looking at spatial distribution of our properties, sites, and programs within the regional context. And so taken together, the information listed in that kind of service category, we believe will provide quantitative and qualitative description of our programs as a foundation for looking ahead and developing priorities and goals. We also think that we can use this information for, the ask and answer with you. What does it mean to cut back, sustain, or increase things like our natural area stewardship, our park operations, the new sites that we may be thinking about through some of our master planning work? And what do we get specifically for these investments? What are the specific outputs and outcomes that the region can expect? So the second category, that teal color, is making sure that we're developing the proper frameworks and protocol to ensure that the agency's guiding values really govern how we deliver our services, not the what, but the how. So you've heard, just we'll touch on a couple of these, and obviously this represents the work of multiple departments and multiple teams. But so you've heard directly from the tribal affairs team on the tools and protocol to strengthen our alignment with tribal government priorities and create opportunities for interested tribes to inform our parks and nature work specifically, such as the tribal government consultation and engagement plan. And then you know that our department recently finalized the updated READY plan 2025 to 2032, which specifies specific actions and outputs to further advance environmental, economic, and cultural equity, health equity, and restorative justice. And I'll just note that we chose to launch the READY update first to really be the foundation as we do the system plan update, so everything kind of can live in those full principles. And then just finally want to note work is underway to continue implementing, addressing our ADA barriers and meeting our commitments throughout our portfolio. So the last category is like measuring success. We've heard from you very clearly that we need to be able to articulate a simple, meaningful story on the impact of our work and have clearly defined terms and targets for what we're aiming for. It also is important to be accountable. What we said we're going to do, how are we measuring to those goals, and what are we sharing with partners? So want to note that this work is underway. We continue to measure progress in alignment with your direction through the strategic targets, the annual budget metrics, but also from some of the bond outcomes work on access that we've talked about in multiple dimensions, economic, climate, and community empowerment, as well as proximity and experience. But I do want to note that there's probably going to be additional opportunities through this process with you to evolve, refine our goals and our targets as you would like. So just want to note that. Okay, next slide. Okay, so as the roadmap process includes funding conversations, we just want to touch back to a slide that you may remember from your fall retreats about building towards readiness and urgency with with any investment measure. And thanks, GAPD folks, for sharing this tree. So you may remember this metaphor, basically showing the 3 phases of a successful ballot measure, from exploration to framework to successful referral and campaign. So just want to orient us for today's conversation. We're at the early phases, the roots phase, just assessing potential needs and expectations, thinking about opportunities and challenges that you want to address over the next couple of years. But we're not in the other phases yet, but eventually the roots phase would end, and we'd expect you to give us direction on a future levy framework. And just want to note, to get to that point, we're already working closely with GAPD, COO, Council Office, and others across the agency. And we'll be ready when you're ready for us to come back for discussions on things like stakeholder engagement, coalition development, public opinion research, needs assessment, and the timing for all this is going to be directed by you as you balance multiple things. Okay, next slide. Just want to share a couple like timing considerations. And again, this is proposed, this is high level and meant for you to help us adjust and push back. So this shows some potential milestones for the roadmap process and deliverables by year with you. So in this year, 2026, the things we would be ready to talk with you about will be building and evaluating some different service delivery scenarios for your discussion. And we'll also be looking at how to set up and build on existing stakeholder and community engagement around these topics. So how are we already bringing stakeholders in, how are we talking about this work and getting some early feedback. In 2027, that's probably when we'll get a little more kind of urgent and work with you on a potential levy framework and really lean into our coalition building and champion development. And then just a couple of notes for 2028, that levy expires in June of that year. And then we would look to have you adopt or approve the updated system plan by the end of that calendar year, once we have already once you've already thought of referred a potential future levy in 2027. That's kind of the sequencing. Okay, next slide. We're zooming back out from some of the details. Okay, so that was a lot of process. Thank you for bearing with me, but just want to end on a reminder of the outcomes of our work, grounding us in like what we're aiming for, right? So like we said, this process is designed for you all to think about the legacy you want to nurture and leave, like passing the baton. So as you think about how to nurture this legacy. We just wanted to preview some of the questions that may make up future council policy discussions and that we may be bringing to you as part of the roadmap process to help guide your deliberations. We are not necessarily asking for you to answer these today, but if things kind of come up for you on these topics, we'd love to hear that. Or maybe you're like, these are not the questions we should be asking, and that's helpful to know too. So with that, we're gonna go to the next slide, and I think I'm gonna hand it back to John to ask the questions that we're able to get your feedback on today.
Thanks, Beth. Yeah, that was a lot. And now it's a chance we want to hear from you. Do these assumptions, align with your expectations in terms of process? And then in terms of information needed, are we gathering the right information to support future council discussions? And what's missing? What can we improve? So this is really a chance to help give us feedback on process and direction for the next couple years. And
Councilors, Councilor Wong.
Oh, great. Thank you, Madam President, for the presentation. Very informative. I have a series of 3 questions. Hopefully they're not too difficult. Just first for the record, can you tell us the levy rate that we have now? And, I just voted and the city of Portland passed a new levy for their parks. Can you just tell us what the levy rates are? So we have a point of comparison of what, operating parks is running nowadays.
Yeah, our operating rate is 9.6 cents per $1,000 assessed.
In Portland, if you're asking for Portland, was they renewed it at $1.40 per $1,000.
So the city of Portland is 14 times.
And it
ours.
was 80 cents. Right.
Just wanted to,
Yeah, no, thank you. It's good comparison.
just to highlight what the public is getting for their 9.4 cents, right? Versus 14 cents. Thank you. And I think just, continuing around, value for taxpayers, I'm often of the mind that we should do less, but, do what we do excellently. And, we had a long discussion and process around, what do we do with our performance arts venues, the P5, and I think it's a win-win, the send, the P5 back to the city of Portland. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts as we have this conversation around, are there things in our portfolio that it makes sense for others to do or that we stop doing? Because I think we're all in a resource constrained environment and we need to double down on the most impactful areas of work. So like, have we had any thoughts or conversation around, well, we gotta, trim some of the work and do what we do really well? Just, for a future kind of levy conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Wong. We've had some conversations and thoughts internally, but as we think about bigger picture, we really want to have these conversations with you all because how that can change things. I will say some of the things we do unique that no one else does is that large scale land acquisition and restoration. That's super unique and really critical. Also the role in convening and helping support around regional trails planning, not necessarily construction operations, but just the planning and convening is really big and unique. And also that grant making that we're able to leverage a tax rate across the region and invest those dollars back into local communities is something unique that doesn't happen as much. And then the experiences we try to provide at our nature parks, try to make those more unique. And that's been part of the discussion with local jurisdictions. We don't operate ball fields and aquatic centers and rec centers. We've really left that to the local jurisdiction. So really trying to balance those pieces. Some of the things that we do where there is potential overlap, but it's things that are, we're able to provide unique experiences, is things like nature education, stewardship, volunteerism. There's other groups that do that, but they don't focus necessarily on our sites or able to tell some of those stories. So even within that, it is maybe ubiquitous in terms of other providers. Look at where that's unique. We have had conversations with this council too when it comes to agriculture, farming, land management. We acquire land, the intent and purpose based on voter direction council is for habitat protection and restoration. It often ends up that it comes with maybe a farm or some land. We've had transition plans where we still stewarded that land in agriculture, but long-term, the plan is to transition out. Some of those properties we acquire also have homes that we've rented out for a period of time, but those are things that should we be in the rental property business as a department long-term? Should we be in the agriculture and farming business long-term? So those are some potential places to look at of how can we support that, but should we be the provider? Should we be the convener? Should we be funder? And so those are a few examples of things that we could look at. And then also just the services that we provide at our parks. We try to be more passive recreation, trails, parking lot, sort of some gathering shelters and spaces, access to water. And so those are some of the basics we provided. But if there's interest in doing more or less, we also have a golf course, that is managed. We have a historic home and another farm site. So there's little things. We manage historic cemeteries, which is really unique. And those are important places for people to connect with nature and with culture and heritage. There'd be others that do it better. No one can do anything better than us, but do we need to keep doing it? These are the interesting questions that we can ask. And yes, that's just a little flavor of some things.
Just in the stakeholder engagement in our planning process, I just want to be sure that there are no sacred cows, but we can be thoughtful. Like, how do we have that conversation? At some point when you all have had a chance.
Yeah, that level of service we've really been categorizing. What are all the things we do? Even administratively, internally, communications, like all those things. What are we doing? How do we do it? What does it cost to do that? So that we can look at how we can be more efficient operating currently as we are. And if there's gonna be other conversations about looking differently in the future to add things or subtract or whatever it may be. So yeah.
And just lastly on the experiencing on our sites, I've recently received some great feedback from our partners in the film industry. And, they said that the department's been much more responsive and they got approval to film at Expo, I think it was, in 48 hours. And I want to appreciate, your team and staff for working on that. I know you'll be back, I think, later this month and talk more about that. But I think, having a conversation in the future around how does the public experience and use our natural areas is so important. And I do think like having great access for in the local film industry makes a ton of sense. How we do that and balance kind of our different interests is going to be really important. So I want to create space for that convo as well. But thus far, give those to the team. Thank you.
Glad to hear the feedback, positive feedback.
Councilor Lewis and then Councilor Wilson.
Thank you. Really appreciated the overview. And in particular, where we are now with the seeds to the roots, to the trunk, to the branches, to the leaves. But in terms of the frame, you are rightly categorizing us amongst our peers in local government. Where we are different is we do big things close to home, they do the golf course. I would come at it also from the other side though, which is where are we value add on top of some state responsibilities in the place where I have found us historically the most significant is in water quality and making sure that we're managing riparian areas, particularly looking at our watershed. That felt in the seed from your presentation, and I wouldn't wonder if it's something we should specifically coming from, as a state, we have historically had environmental aspirations that we've never actually funded as a state. Where have we done that as a region? And how much do we want to continue to do that? It's an important line for the future scope. And then second, I do want to just look up Councilor's third point about the good experience folks have, even if it's not in what we consider to be the pinnacle or the highest and best purposes. I have friends who think of Metro and think about garbage and golf. And if they have a great experience playing around a golf and, a good public course, I think that's good and in and of itself important. If we can give them a little bit of an extra nature trail along around the Gulf, that's great. But I do think cemeteries, the Gulf, some of the stuff that's outside of the periphery, being the solid communicator and deliver service really matters. And we don't have any agencies, so it's not.
Councilor Lewis, and yeah, I appreciate the piece on maybe we didn't hit as much on the habitat protection restoration and how not only unique but important that work is. I guess I just get so used to it, I forget to talk about it sometimes the same way, but we also had effort in looking at where we can support the updating of the regional conservation strategy that was developed with partners like the Intertwine Alliance, Bird Alliance, and all these other folks that really helped us set that framework of you have the statewide goal 5, federal level, and what is that regional overall strategy that works with the green spaces master plan and some of the work that we have. And so we've been engaging in those conversations to say, what are things we need to prepare for with climate is changing, those different pieces and things, and where are we making big progress? You know, I think statewide, the Sandy River and the Clackamas River are two of the most productive fisheries that aren't declining like the rest of them in the state, but are actually improving. And Metro doesn't do this all on our own, but with a lot of partners, we're people involved in this. So appreciate that nod, make sure to elevate that a lot more. It's why we're parks and nature.
And those are, I think, partners that don't always show up here. They went to the Steelhead or annual meeting, right? And they love Metro, and you know, Clackamas River is one of their strongest subgroups or whatever they call them. So I do think we just need to continue to go out in the field for that partnership, as much as we do have the partners that come here. Councilor Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I want to say a great deal of, I'd say, praise and accomplishment to our Parks and Nature team for developing or being very opportunistic and doing a lot of things that are very good, you know, with sometimes limited resources. One of the things particularly is some of the facilities that we have developed. They really are, they appear to be high quality and they're well done. We also pay a lot of attention to nature and quality of nature. So I think we've done a lot. However, one caveat is we've created a very complicated system. And I would just point out when we have allies, we have a whole bunch of, we have federal allies, National Wildlife Refuge in my district. We have a lot of allies with the state, but we have state parks around, Triangle Creek, for example, Stubb Stewart, so forth. So, and then we have the regional park systems, and then we have the local park systems, all of which have different aspects, which is going to make it very difficult. So I guess my question, if I have a question at this point, there's just a lot to consider. One question is, to what questions will the Future Vision Commission be asked to weigh in on? Because we're really looking at a 50-year future in terms of parks, recreation, and access, and nature and natural areas. This is a long-term kind of project that we're working on. So I think that the Future Vision Commission is going to have to weigh in on that. And then the other question is, I think there's maybe not a bright line, but somewhat of a line between the regional parks areas and the local parks areas in terms of protection of nature, habitat, water quality, and things like that. And I don't know to what extent the regional districts have some of the same goals in terms of equity, in terms of habitat protection, in terms of water quality protection. I assume they have some of it, Tualatin Hills, North Clackamas. I don't know, Washington County is sort of an odd, they don't really have a parks department, but they have a park. So I think there's a lot of, it's almost a Sisyphean task for you to deal with all these different interests and to come up with some coherent way of doing this with all the kinds of things that we have. So these are questions that we're just going to have to think about and figure out where we want to go. I think you've been great in developing these things, but they all have their own individual unique characteristics. And that's going to continue to be the case. So, like I said, I'm interested to see how the Future Vision attacks this. And I'm also interested in seeing how we come up with some ideas. I don't have any clear direction.
Thank you, Councilor Rosenthal. Yeah, we meet regularly with the Future Visions team and are trying to consider how we can make sure to plug in and how much the Parks and Nature System plan that you all potentially consider, is that going to feed into the future visions or be defined by? So we continue to think about that. And then also, what is the role that we play, right? When are we convening and advocating? When are we providing funding for services? So those will be some good conversations. And in terms of other regional providers, regular conversations with them as well. Also want to flag, I think I shared with some of you in some briefings, but the first week of June this year is the Special Park District Forum. It's a national gathering of special park district providers. They gather at a different spot every single year to learn, share, grow, and unlike conferences where you just sit in like a bunch of conference meeting rooms, no disrespect to Expo and the convention center, great places. These are outside, so you get to go and visit, go on field trips, and see the work in progress, and then ask questions of each other. So THPRD, Tualatin Parks and Rec, and Metro will be co-hosting this year in the Portland area. So first week of June, we'd love to, as more is developed, get you all out and see where there's other people from across the nation talking about how they do their work and how they incorporate equity or tribal justice or climate resilience, or thinking long-term about funding, because that is something also that President Peterson you mentioned is, hey, we know we've got this kind of urgency around the levy. Is there a longer, bigger conversation about long-term sustainable funding, which hopefully these conversations can lead to more of that with future visions. So yes, here you want all of that.
Thank you.
And Sisyphus is the one pushing the rock up the hill, right?
Yeah, it's
Okay. Yeah. My mom would be proud to know my Greek mythology.
keep the rock from rolling back down and crushing you. And we've created a complex system and it's great. That makes the challenge even greater. If we just had one park, it would be easy, but we have a lot of different kinds of parks.
As the engineer, I'm just gonna try and find a way to get the damn rock up the hill. All right. So, any counselors online? Nothing against based. I have a couple of things. I think what I'd love to see next, is all of the targets, performance metrics, targeted universalism thinking, like everything that you feel has come your way over the last 35 years that you feel is in the background, that is a performance metric of some sort that has been sitting out there, has been used, has been talked about. Because right now that's an amorphous being to me of what you see on the other side of this big planning effort in terms and how we are going to land the plan on the access, because my understanding, we haven't landed that plane and adopted anything or on track to adopt something around access and the definitions and the performance metrics, like what are we actually trying to achieve there? And that gets into levels of service for me to be more specific when we go into conversations with the public about how much of our portfolio are we expecting to be accessible and how much is not and why. So that we're much more clear about what that means in the greater sense of things. But I'd like to see that whole universe of things that you're seeing that we may not see, whether that's gold, whether that's right. All of these things that are coming at us from all directions. So that's the first thing I think for next conversations, because I don't think we have a clue of what you're saying. And then on the backside of all this, I guess what I'd love to see continuing forward is based on getting the definitions for access kind of done, and then looking at how those play out with maps, some mapping around that in the future. And I'd love to be able to also have a discussion of these maps overlaid with the urban and rural reserves. Because if we're starting to think that we're going to go into the urban reserves for justifiable reasons, we should know that, because that takes away land from possible development. And that's a key issue that we should be aware of, especially for the future vision. And then in terms of things that we have not been doing that I think we need to get on the list to talk about, of things to do, sorry to put more on the list. I think you have ideas of what to take off the list, but putting stuff on the list. Obviously the cooling corridors and wildfire resilience. What is our role going to be in wildfire resiliency? Because right now this region doesn't have any money to go after state or federal money. And we have very large tracts of land in this region that will take out entire cities. And that's no joke. And we're not having that conversation. So that was kind of my list for next steps. No response necessary, really. Just expectation.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm glad that you all, hopefully there's other things that you brought up in briefings or things that you did see reflected. This is a great time to talk with your colleagues. Again, what are the things that you're interested in? So thank you for that very clear list of getting next conversation measures synthesized and bring that back. Map overlay with urban reserves and things to consider also like cooling corridors, fire resilience. Yeah, I have things I would say for once we get further down the way, but I think those ideas, I guess I will say, if you were to consider future like increase in levy, and the question's been, what do you get for that? And there are things that could be added and considered. Regional trail maintenance supports as a movement, that support for natural resource, protection enhancement, specifically with wildfire resilience, those kind of things, are things that can be considered in more value adds to the region as part of that role of funder, not necessarily provider. So yeah, I'll be excited to hear more of the things that folks are interested in as we bring this information back to you and continue the conversation.
And now they're robots to go out and do the work, so.
I would just, on the access piece, I really appreciate you bringing this up. Like when we last visited with you on some of this, it was a while back, and we talked about some of the bond outcomes work, and there was we kind of talked about the multiple dimensions of access. So economic, community empowerment, time, proximity, and experience. And I think, like, I just want to reflect back and have you all hear it and affirm that those are high level kind of vision and outcomes. I think maybe what we're hearing asked for is more narrow and refined and clear definitions and targets, especially drilling down into like proximity and experience with that mapping. So both like where things are located, but also like the experience that folks can expect at our sites, and even unpacking access. Like right now, all of our natural lands are accessible. So what do people expect, and what do we want them to expect when they pull off the side of the road at one of our natural areas? Is that okay versus our developed sites? And so just want to pose that and make sure we're hearing that correctly, and we can definitely bring that back.
I assumed some of the council wanted to go further than just a general concept of access.
Great.
But much more specific so that we can actually articulate that we've made it better.
And like some numeric, being really clear about the targets. And this is the right, I just want to find this is the right place and process to be doing this. So we'll appreciate that.
Councilor Nolan, and then back to Councilor Wilson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I really liked the comments that you made, and particularly your discussion about access. And we talk about access in a number of ways, especially with our regional park system. Access as in, is the land itself something that human beings can enter into? But there's also the very large and significant aspect of access, which is who within our region can and does get to and utilize our properties. And I think we need to look at that. Since John, you're taking notes on ways to increase the texture of the information you give us, we need to look at it as a system as a whole, but also because we have different types of properties, we need to look at what types of properties are different communities accessing, and which are they not, and why are what are the reasons for their not? Is it transportation? Is it not a sense of not feeling welcome? Is it the absence of mobility aids for some of our communities? And really understanding, not just totally for the region, but for folks in North Portland and folks in Wilsonville and folks in Gresham? What are the limitations on their use of our parks for enjoyment and also for education?
Thank you, Councilor Nolan. Yeah, be that utilization question has come up a lot and by site and by user group. So I'll look at some ways to capture that more effectively, and then also that access to parks and green spaces. I think you heard from the planning department, or they presented somewhere, maybe at MPAC or JPAC a while ago, about the transit to parks strategy. So we've been working with the folks too about looking at all the different regional parks, not just the metro ones, but how are people getting potentially to these places? How are they not? And what does it take to get there? So it's another aspect you all have shared a lot, is how are people getting to the sites as well, especially with public transit.
And thank you for that. And I know that the planning department is thinking of it. We all know that challenge, particularly for transit dependent residents of the metro area, that is going to be much more difficult in the near term. We may have to step up in some ways about that, and I don't know what that looks like yet.
Yes, I was just about to call in. I was just saying there was a response. Councilor Rosenthal.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just want to second the comments by Councilor Nolan and President Peterson regarding the access. I think the question is important is we may have to develop some sort of tiered prioritization for some of our sites, some of them high access, some of them no access and so forth. I think it's something that we need to work on. And I would just comment that in the era of $300 million budget shortfall for TriMet, we're not going to be getting much help from TriMet on some of this. So as Councilor Nolan said, we may have to see what we can do, pick up the ball and do this. I mean, it's an equity issue that our people are concerned about. So I support their comments.
Any other questions? Oh, Councilor Gonzalez.
Thanks, President Peterson. John and team, thank you for the presentation. I've been trying to like formulate a new question and like a new angle that I don't think I've brought or the council has thought about, but kind of thinking through taking a steps back into the policy that we have carried out since the 90s, especially with our major bonds and our acquisition frameworks and things like that. So, at a really basic high level, the understanding that I have and that I continue to hear from Metro staff is that we have way more land than we are able to develop into accessible parks and manage, operate, take care of all the things that we need to do, right? Um, and I'm kind of coming back to in the most recent Parks and Nature bond, we like the largest bucket by hands down of money that we have reserved is for acquisition. So we continue to grow the acres and things like that, which I know is important for multiple reasons. But what I don't recall really is having a conversation about around why that is, because I think what we've done is we've kind of carried the historic precedent of this is what this is. This is an acquisition. It's an open space. It's open space. It's open space. I think right now the question that a lot of people are saying, well, is it really open space? Is it not? You know what I mean? So anyway, I think like I'm kind of coming back to that, and I know we're not necessarily talking about the parks bond that is already passed, not recommending that we change it, but I do want to plant a seed for 10, 15 years from now when the council does have to think about this again and a new parks bond, like what is that right makeup of that? And do we want to prioritize more like gross acquisition of raw acres, or do we want to prioritize other things? Because I'm seeing the tension there. I don't think we'll ever be able to have enough money to operationalize all the things that we want, especially in this resource constrained environment. So I'm coming back to that like core question of Metro's approach. with this, and like just curious to hear what you think, how you've managed that in your leadership as a director that has inherited a lot of, different chapters of the work at Metro as well.
Thank you, Councilor Gonzalez. Yeah, it's a great question. And, I mentioned the special park district forum that's coming up. We're modeled a lot after the East Bay Parks and Rec. They started as a water utility, actually, and the focus was on protecting habitat for water quality for people to have drinking water. And with that, they also opened parks, natural areas. And I think that what we do is so unique. I forget and don't realize sometimes that there's no other metro, right? Regionally elected government. There's not many others out there doing large scale habitat restoration protection for habitat and for the sake of that and that long-term vision. So that's a really unique thing that we have that I think is really vital. We've talked a bit in the past about what are some big targets and goals potentially, and haven't necessarily adopted one, but there's a large one that's international, which is the 30%. If you can protect 30% of a given section of habitat within any kind of region or area, you'll save 90% of the species, right? So that 30% number regionally, when we look at Metro and all of our partners, I think we're somewhere in the maybe 9 to 11%. So if we wanted to get closer to that place of saving 90% of the species in the region long term, we'd want to continue to do that land acquisition. And that doesn't mean that people can't go and visit those places still. It just means that that's that priority, that forward base. So I think this is an opportunity to have these bigger conversations about what is that role? What are those larger universal targets that we would have in terms of habitat protection for long-term sustainability of the region? In terms of the management piece, the goal and intent overall is that once we acquire these lands, have enough of them in a large enough connection of a site and do major restoration, the goal is to get to free to grow states, which is nature does its thing with minimal involvement from staff. So the actual cost of managing these natural areas over time will decrease or be much more sustainable and predictable. Whereas things like when we open and manage nature parks, those have a lot more moving pieces, require a lot more time, energy, and effort. So I think finding that balance of nature parks with natural areas, what are the level of service that we want to provide, I think are great questions. But at this point, that unique thing of being able to acquire land for long term is forward looking. Mount Tabor, the Olmsted brothers came through back in the early 1900s and identified Mount Tabor, which was way out in the cuts. And now it's completely surrounded, Cooper Mountain. So these long-term plannings and these investments in habitat, I think, are critical, unique, and it's always easier, quote unquote, to convert land into housing, business, industry. It's extremely difficult to regreen, depave things. So but really good questions and conversations for this council to think long-term about how we grow and what we manage.
Thanks, John. I really appreciate that. And I think I like even just hearing you say this so well, like over and over again, but every time you I think as humans we hear different things or like take new dots that we're connecting. And I think like the way that you just described again, like the difference between the natural areas, natural parks and things like that, and this probably comes back to Councilor Rosenthal's point about like creating different tiers of like a natural area versus a nature park. They're very different. Like you can't really qualify access the same. And so if you're using the same denominator of 20,000 acres, we're actually doing ourselves a disservice in the policy discussion. So I think what I'm feeling is like a disconnect between us as policymakers and the expectation that we have around access, and then making sure that we're kind of setting the right denominator and to create those correct like access rates or whatever it is that we want. So that's kind of like a new thing that I'm walking away from this work session with, thinking through. And then just one last quick question, because you talked about the 30%, which I think is helpful. I think I don't know if the council has had a presentation specifically on what this international standard is, but I would welcome learning more about it. On the 9%, more or less, and I'm sure there's kind of like it's a rough number, but does that include like only lands that are owned by the public, or does it also include like lands that are owned by private owners but are overlaid as like environmental zones that can never be developed? and things like that. So how are we getting to that 9%?
I'm looking at our conservation program director, Dan Mueller, who provided some of these numbers like 5 years ago. So
you're
I'll have to
good.
get
Thanks,
back
Dan.
to look at specifically what is included in that assessment and where we are with numbers, but mostly it's looking at sort of under public ownership and some higher degree of protection. So, but I'll add on those details. So.
Thanks, John. Yeah.
And
thanks.
just for awareness of the 20,000 acres, about 2/3 of the portfolio is natural areas. And then a third is nature parks. And those nature parks are like Chehalem Ridge and Oxbow that are like, 1,000 acres or 1,200 acres, where most of it is still natural area, but it's considered nature park in the overall footprint. So a third of the portfolio is nature park roughly in historic zone.
Thanks, John. Thanks, President Peterson. I'm walking away with a new kind of theme in my mind that I can noodle on here. Thank you.
No, I think it just points out to me the very important conversation about where we target and how multiple they can compete with conflicting goals, right? With the urban and rural reserves. If we go into the rural reserves, we're going after farmland. We're competing with farmland. If we go into the rural and the urban reserves, we're competing with future development potential. We need to have that conversation. I think it's just an important conversation.
And this is just giving us, like, we know some of the existing conditions, mapping and data, site classification is pretty involved. Some of those conversations. So thank you.
Just checking.
I mean, the whole point of the rural reserves, if I can just go back, the point of the rural reserves and the urban reserves was not just to say where we're going to grow, it was to give the farmers and the landowners that are managing their land outside the urban growth boundary the ability to invest in their property, like water systems for growing food, right? So if we're suddenly competing in a different way, it's a lot of pressure. So I just think it's just a good conversation to say, what are our priorities? Let's be clear about what we're doing. And if we're going to do something, be clear with the folks in those areas about what we're going to be doing and not be wishy-washy about it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. We've had, I think in the 2019 bond, you all directed us to build stronger relationships and conversations with farmers and soil water district. And I think that's really helpful. They appreciated being part of the process and not seeing it as necessarily a threat or competing, just factor to consider. It's a willing seller program. We've also looked at ways for conservation easements and those opportunities. So, but you're right, there will be this potentially competing priorities, and are there ways to think differently, like maybe they do in some other countries where it's not either or, like that,
Right.
that both end of like building, designing together smartly. I think for that resilience, I don't know how we do it, but we can figure it out. So we've got smart people, smarter.
Not easy. Not easy, but thank you. All right, are we ready to move on? Thank you, Beth. John, you want to move on to Willamette Cove?
Yes, thank you very much. Sit back down.
Does that help you reset?
It does reset. Put my Willamette Cove
It's a physical.
Nature Park hat on. I
For you to kick it off, hey, I will dive in. Slide back and coming up. Good morning still. I'm Andrew Scott, Deputy Chief Operating Officer. Thanks for the opportunity to be here today. This is actually a great transition conversation we just had about nature parks. We're going to talk about Willamette Cove, nature park update. There's an important milestone coming up for Willamette Cove, which is approval of the Nature Master Park in March. And we're updating you today on the project to get your thoughts and feedbacks. Final changes that we made and we get that. Go ahead, bring it this. Just as a little bit of background, you know, this Willamette Cove is located in North Portland. It presents a really meaningful environmental justice opportunity by providing access to nature close to where people live. So, apropos the conversation you just had, it will be the only natural area within the 11-mile Superfund stretch where the public can both access to the river and adjacent natural habitat. Next slide. And the site also plays a really important role supporting salmon recovery.
It includes the creation of shallow water habitat along riverbanks, providing rest and refuge for fish as they migrate upstream. More broadly, Willamette Cove fits within the larger string of pearls vision along the Willamette River, focused on reconnecting fish and wildlife with habitat restoration. It's also notable because it is the first comprehensive project where Metro established clear plan for tribal consultation at the outset. It's also the first project where tribes collaborated directly with Metro on the site conservation plan, which helps set a precedent for future plans. And I think what I would say as someone who's relatively new to this project over the last year and a half or so, and sort of coming to grips with it, is listening to the conversation you just had. It's exactly the conversation the parks staff have been having about this. How do we create a nature park in this area that provides that access, but still has space for habitat, still manages that? I mean, you're all probably familiar with the People Park, which is just literally a few hundred yards, maybe a quarter mile, upstream, downstream from where Willamette Cove is. The goal here is not People Park, right? This is not to create an area where we're going to have concerts, or they're going to stage a triathlon, or they're going to have big summer gatherings and picnics. But the idea is to provide some place where people can access the water, people can walk down one of the regional trails, people can see wildlife, they can view the river, and also providing some of those wildlife corridors. And actually, as I've been listening to the amazing park staff really grapple with this, it's been really interesting. How do we create something that is able to do both of those things on a very small site? Jennifer's going to talk about some of those challenges as well. So in a minute, you're going to hear from Jennifer DeVonzo, project manager for the master plan, who will walk through how that design has evolved since last November. John's also going to outline some of the funding considerations and trade-offs for the construction of it. And I'm just going to provide a brief overview of site history master plan. So next slide. So this slide just presents that brief history of recent council actions regarding Willamette Cove. November of 2020, Metro Council sent a letter to Q, which outlined our priorities for the site, emphasizing that Willamette Cove should be considered a nature park with a range of passive recreational activities and water access, not just a remediated site management trail. In December of that year, 2020, Council adopted a resolution that formally initiated the master planning and engagement process for the nature park. And then as part of the record of decision process, Metro Council voted unanimously to remove the excavated soils from the site rather than construct an on-site containment cell. Most of you probably remember that conversation. And that decision really reflected feedback from tribes, community members, other partner organizations, and aligned with the vision of the site as a nature park intended for people. And in July of 2021, Council approved a $10 million budget for the Willamette project overall, which supported cleanup activities and also provided some funding to begin the master planning community travel. Next slide. And then just to pose the questions today that we'll come back to at the end of this presentation. But as we provide that update and where we're going to head and where we're headed towards that master plan approval in March, this is the question we're really hoping we can get some feedback on. Does the draft preferred master plan and overall approach to programming the council's priorities for Willamette Cove? Do you have enough information about relative trade-offs to provide some initial guidance?
For having us here today. I'm Jennifer DeVanzo, landscape architect, senior regional planner, nature department, as well as the project manager for the Nature Park Master Plan. Council's decision to prioritize Willamette Cove allows us to be here today to share how the park is taking shape and how that vision is being carried through the master plan. This project represents a long-term investment in people, plants, and wildlife, and it opens access to communities who have had limited connection to this stretch of the Willamette River. Guided by the resolution 2051-49 that Andrew just mentioned, staff developed a meaningful engagement strategy and clear goals for the master plan. Next slide, please. Those goals on the screen are to create a holistic vision for the nature park that provides habitat for fish and wildlife and passive recreation, develop the master plan in coordination with tribal governments, indigenous communities, people of color, people with disability, youth, conservation, and other community advocacy groups, neighbors, and Metro staff. Provide safe and accessible connections to North Portland Greenway Trail, including neighborhood trails, interior nature trails, and water access, and define areas for entry, parking, and gathering, and create opportunities for cultural elements, education that highlights Indigenous connections to the land and site histories. So those goals will guide us through the next few slides. So next slide, please. So this is showing that we are nearing the end of a 4-phase master planning process where community engagement and tribal consultation is weaved throughout the process. In phase 1, we imagined the park with tribes and communities and identified values such as land healing and thriving, balanced habitat and recreation, and cultural connections. In phase 2, we translated those values into 3 design options, which we presented to Metro Council in November 2024. And in phase 3, which began in early January 2025, we drafted a preliminary design based on that feedback from phase 2. And now we're here in phase 4, presenting the draft preferred plan from phase 3, and we'll be returning to Metro Council in March for adoption of a master plan. Next slide, please. So across all the feedback we got from the design concepts, a consistent message came forward, which was nature is at the forefront. So from science team recommendations, council feedback, and tribal and community input, all pointed towards fewer trails, less programming, and more habitat. Tribal partners emphasize returning the site to a place for fish and wildlife, clean water, and connections to the river. The image on the bottom of this slide is the draft preliminary design, which reflected that shared vision. Next slide. The draft preliminary design was refined through many collaborative sessions with the in-water partners, the upland remedial design team, parks and nature staff, tribes, and community. While cleanup designs continue to refine site conditions and the banks, the nature park remains flexible through this process. And working sessions with science teams, operations and maintenance, land management, education, stewardship, and directors helped align the plan with long-term operational realities. And then we took the plan and then presented back to tribal governments, got their input, and then updated the plan again to a draft preferred design, which was presented at a public open house in October of 2026. So on this slide, at the top image to the bottom, you can see where we reduced trails and program elements to increase habitat. So some of those key things that we presented back in November of 2024, we scaled the over the water walkway to a small overlook, which you'll see in the next few slides. Converting all trails to durable hard surfaces that also help with accessibility. Removed the floating dock due to costs and remediation concerns. Next slide, please. So I'm going to walk briefly through how this park comes together with these different elements. So I'll start with park entrances. Most visitors will start on the left hand of the slide, which is the North Richmond entrance. That is the main vehicular entrance with parking lot and trailhead. And then further to the right side of the screen is North Edgewater Avenue. This would be primarily for pedestrian and bike access, as well as emergency access. Next slide. Each slide will keep building on the program. So this one is for gathering spaces. So once users are on the site. Gathering spaces are concentrated near the park entrances to limit impacts elsewhere. Near the parking lot, there's a restroom, shelter, and a main gathering area that supports everyday visits, small school groups, and informal community use. And then a second smaller gathering space near North Edgewater provides a reflective setting that can be used for tribal and cultural uses. This may be temporarily closed for special events. And as we continue to design further details, we'll be working with tribal partners on those ideas. Next slide. Layers and trails. So the trails system is comprised of a regional trail and interior trails that connects users to and throughout the park and the river. There's a small children's trail that offers education opportunities. And then there's the separate nature trail from the regional trail, which provides a more immersive nature experience. In the narrow central portion of the site, removing the walkway allowed for a small overlook for visitors to have a moment with the river and for some rest along the trails. So overall, the trails system reflects a careful balance between access and nature. Next slide. Is water access. So water access is key to the park experience. The design provides year-round water access for a range of users via a staircase with a boat slide, an accessible pathway from the parking lot, and an accessible trail to the Cove beach. Beach connections are designed to be accessible so everyone can reach the river's edge. And next slide. This slide is showing like how all access and gathering occurs within this broader story of restoration. During remediation, all the existing vegetation and trees will be removed to herd. While this will look dramatic at first, it is necessary for long-term safety, healing, and creates opportunities for learning. Restoration will follow the Willamette Cove Site Conservation Plan that Andrew mentioned that we worked on with the tribes, focusing on shallow water habitat, riparian forests, and oak madrone woodland. There's also a discussion that about using mature madrone seeds on site can be sourced to support future restoration. So we'll continue to closely coordinate with the cleanup partners, Metro departments, nature departments to ensure the smooth transition from remediation to restoration. And then the next slide will show some of these renderings of what the park could feel like, showing entry and trails and water access. So the next slide is really, you know, how is this all going to happen? So while the master planning is nearing completion, which is the first stage on the slide, park delivery is just beginning. So the remaining stages include the middle band, which is design, engineering, and permitting, and then construction would come after the site is remediated, and then restoration, and then travel and community input to go out. So the draft master plan reflects input from the tribes, community, project partners, and Metro staff about access, restoration, and long-term care. With that foundation in place, for John to talk about funding.
Thanks. Next slide, please. So you've seen a lot of the great work that Jennifer and folks have been doing to get us to this place. And so wanted to talk a little bit about some of the costs of funding. So this table shows 3 main phases of park development along with costs and funding status and bond program areas that is covered in previous council actions. Also with what needs additional council action, budget process, or other resolutions. So currently in that stage 1, master planning engagement, zone scope, schedule, budgets. Great job with that. And we're prepared to move into the next stage of design, engineering, and permitting after council considers master plan adoption. We've also identified funds for those. It's in the stages 4 and 5 when we get into more of that construction, restoration, closeout, that we have some known costs that need to be refined over time, but we have not yet identified and confirmed specifically funding for that next stage. This table doesn't show something important also is the projected operations and maintenance costs, but those will be dictated a lot by the final design of what actually is in there. So we have some estimates, but those will be more refined as we get further into the process. Next slide. So this shows some high level the considerations and trade-offs that we look at for any of our capital construction projects. We balance our overall project prioritization for the 5-year capital investment improvement plan using the agency's CPMO construction project management office guidance, and then Parks and Nature specific prioritization. So the matrix looked at a lot of different factors. Willamette Cove, like any site, is being considered in the context of the overall Parks and Nature system, previous plans, efforts, cleanup, restoration, regional trail development, park development, and renewal, replacement, and repair. So some of the considerations we have, we've heard from our tribal government partners, community groups, general public, partner agencies about hopes, dreams, desires, concerns, commitments that we'll want to balance. We also have this question, and we talked a little bit in the last presentation about the overall park system and portfolio. Where are we? How are we balancing things like a site enhancement or expanding the portfolio as compared to places where we're doing more site management, repair, renewal, replacement type things, or even retirement of assets in some cases. So being able to look at how this all fits in, knowing we've got, as Beth had mentioned before, a lot of unfunded projects identified. This is one of those, and how are we making sure to help prioritize this now for the future. This also shows up in capital construction funds. We're fortunate with voters to have the trust and support for capital bonds, which generate those capital dollars and operating levies, but those need to be calibrated over time to make sure that we have operating dollars to keep up with construction development dollars. And then bond spend timing has been something that's come up. We've heard a lot from this council, making sure that we're able to deliver on promises, spend those bond funds, looking at spending bond funds down by 2031. So how do we balance holding funds for various projects that may have opportunity costs for other projects? And then one final factor that we have on here, it's probably most significant and unique to Willamette Cove, is the construction phasing constraints due to cleanup and long-term monitoring. We often, bless you, adopt master plans that are multi-phase visions, knowing that we could unlock certain things over time. So like at Killen Wetlands, we developed and opened the park, but there's additional trail expansion and bird blinds or shelters, other things that were considered. Same with Jalen Ridge and Newell Creek Canyon. We can know that, hey, we'll get the first phase in there so people can enjoy it. And then we look at if there's additional funding and priorities to add more that was in the overall master plan. At Willamette Cove, we might have one shot to do this because of the complexity of needing to do the cleanup of mediation. There are certain things that we'll have to put in now that we might not be able to come back and add later. Those are also going to have to factor into the final design because if the assets we put in there are failing, we need to be prepared. We need to understand how we can fix those assets in the future. So lots of fun things to consider as we really help to develop this special place and provide this amazing experience for the public. Next slide. So in terms of potential funding available, this is a summary of 6 bond programs and earnings that have been generated to date. You can see the total programs or fund amounts in the one column there. We also included a place where we can just get the impact of the program if we're to use it as a funding source for Willamette Cove. Very familiar with the 6 bond program areas. And you heard just back in November, your Bond Oversight Committee's annual report about the status and progress. So each of these programs, there's opportunities, limitations to consider. Programs like local share, large scale community visions, protect and restore land, and take care of metro parks have funds that are largely identified or committed to projects and be a challenge to move some of those around. Places like the Nature Neighborhoods grants program and regional trails would be moderately impacted, but don't have as much available funding in terms of overall size and scale. Bond earnings should generate through premium and interest are a variable amount over time and don't have concrete spending plans. So it lowers the short-term impact on those funds, but might have higher impacts on longer-term flexibility or overall bond contingency. So those earnings also are restricted through the council resolution to the metro programs of protect and restore and take care of metro parks as directed through a council bond resolution. we also want to come back to all this winter and have a much broader discussion about those bond earning and those options and things for you all to consider about how to allocate those. Next slide. So with all of that, this slide just kind of summarizes high level those funding options and acknowledges some sources that potentially have more significant funding. So see the major funding sources, which have those range of like $10 to $20 million potentially, as well as the minor funding sources like trails and other grants being maybe $1 to $3 million. Based on kind of the slides that I shared before in previous consideration, staff is leaning towards recommending the primary option of using the bond earnings as kind of that main place to look at and potentially reallocation of other programs. We also see in that minor funding that the regional trail segment that goes through the nature park, using some of those funds to help fund that trail, and we'll continue to look for external grants. So as the work continues on the master plan and we come and bring this to you, we're happy to give a more refined recommendation if you all would like at that time, but just wanted to give some context of how we think about these things, how we're thinking about funding, some of the opportunities, considerations, and sort of where we're leaning based on some initial conversations with you all that we've heard, and look forward to coming back to be more finalization as part of the master plan adoption in March. And with that, I'll pass it back to Jennifer to talk about just kind of next steps and questions.
Next slide, please. So this next slide shows what's next for us. So we'll be meeting Thursday tomorrow, also February 4th. And then March 5th will be coming back for proposed adoption for the master plan. And then March 15th, we are looking at soliciting requests for proposal for the design engineering and consultant. And then by July 1st, industry. And just closing. So last questions again, just have them up on the screen for you all.
Thank you. This is a very exciting point to be at. Excited to see actual contract going out for design and engineering. Councilors, any questions? Councilor Lewis and then Councilor Rosenthal.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really like the design that has been developed, and I like it in particular because of the process we use to get there. Everything from being on site and letting folks play their imagination to living in the state class students with all of their building proposals. So I'm pretty happy. The imaginary line is a real line, it's a water line, but the imaginary line of responsibility between where we are and then where water is, the harmful energy loops, does concern me, because I do really think that we need to look at ways that our design and our infrastructure can potentially influence the continuation of algae bloom in the Willamette. It's not an isolated incident or site, but we should think through what investment we can make immediately in studies, and what investment those studies might suggest in terms of design difference from shore, which would be us, and not the other party. So that's a real concern to me that we get that budgeted ASAP. So I don't know if that's in that 8 point whatever, but if not, I'd love to see it moved to that immediate spend budget. Because I do think we have enough money for a water study and algae study. After that, I do think that you've identified appropriate buckets when it comes to looking at the reallocation of the bond to the existing configuration. We listed the total amounts. I think there's probably 2 additional columns we need to see The additional amount of money that's literally out the door or committed and spent. And then what we've also committed to. So while those dollars may be still looking unspent to our CFO, there are many in our community who see that it's committed, and I don't want to see spending those areas. I do not think there's a single bucket that has a $1 zillion left. But I do think that some are potentially more flexible than others based on existing commitments. You know, we've taken on some big projects to prepare what Metro already has. So I'm guessing that there's not a lot left in that bucket. Would have hoped we would have made that bucket big enough for this. But we didn't. So it might, in my mind, mean that we're not going to buy as many acres, which means we prioritize. We have 2 dozen sites that are our target sites across the region, or our target zones, not specific parcels. You know, originally I think we were gonna get to every single one of those, maybe once, maybe twice, maybe not once, twice. That's a trade-off that I'm willing to take. So, yes, and there's a little bit of texture that you're gonna reallocate within those bond funds. We need a lot more information about the commitments that are already in place before we can say which motion.
Thanks for those comments. And I'm laughing just a little bit because we actually had that slide with some of those columns on it. And I actually asked the team to take it out because it got very busy and hard to follow it. We tried to replace it just with that impact, sort of showing that in those areas where a lot of those funds are committed or out the door, the impact changing very, very high. You have that data, and certainly to the extent you make any recommendations about allocating those bond funds, yes, to make sure that everyone's fully aware of issues. I think as John mentioned, it's kind of where the bond proceeds are clearly the lowest impact because they are not yet allocated. And I did want to note there was a footnote on that slide just to remind council that you did say that all the bond proceeds need to be allocated to either taking care of metro parks or protected store. You obviously change that, but that's the guidance that we're still under. That works for Willamette Cove because it is a metro park, and so to the extent you need to be the ones that council can take an action to allocate those funds and to do allocate to those two. So that's really what we're trying to preview in terms of what we'll probably be coming back to you with. But that's not to say that all of those other bond programs over the course of the next months or years, if something shows up and we say, well, actually, wait, there is a little bit of space here, but reallocated, would also need to come back to you with all. So coming back to your first point, I appreciate that. And we've had a really conversation on that. John can talk a little bit about some of the action he and his teams are doing around the harmful algae blooms. I think you're absolutely right. Willamette Cove, we need to make sure we're thinking about the design perspective of them. I also want to make sure we put it in a larger perspective. And we mentioned this. It is not a Willamette Cove issue. It's not a Willamette Cove problem. It's a river issue and problem. And so to the extent Metro and Metro Council wants to get more involved in that, which I think there's a role for us to play. We kind of want to make it not a Willamette Cove issue, but a larger issue. And John and I have been talking about that as well. If we're going to fund the study. And again, I don't think funding a study, sorry. I'm very expensive. But really thinking about it, like, you know, what is the role we play there? And it's certainly a design aspect of like, oh, we're already doing.
Yeah, thanks, Councilman Lewis. Just to add to that, we're invited to a January 21st annual gathering, just looking at harmful algae blooms along the Willamette River. I think we passed that on to you, but I'm not sure be able to make it past other councilors. But yeah, I'll have a few minutes to share that we're interested. We see this as an opportunity and challenge to address. And Allison Clements, who's our environmental remediation expert over there, is meeting with some of the continues to meet in-water parties as part of this whole process, but I believe they have a meeting next week just to continue talking about those topics so we can look at, again, not being able to just pass the buck and say this isn't our thing, but being able to say, how do we look at this together? So we'll continue to gather information to the best role, but be able to indicate, you know, a couple of weeks of this large gathering. We see this, we're interested in learning more. And I believe you're also involved in some conversations about gathering around the Willamette River, a little further upstream, or in the like Locks and Falls area. So if there's an opportunity to think about, as I'm saying, this whole maybe lower Willamette River that is within Metro's direct sort of sphere of influence or interest, how we can have some of those maybe conversations. Also just wanted to touch a little bit on the Protect and Restore Fund and land acquisition. Just want to put some context for that. That program area, while it's the largest of this bond, it's actually a smaller percentage than it was in previous bonds. So there has been sort of over time, less of an emphasis, at least through, dollars for dollars on that piece. And currently the team is doing extremely well and is hitting targets and is spending at a rate that will definitely get us to that 2031 spend down, if not sooner. So that group, probably in the next years will be coming about looking at are there ways to actually put more funds into that because of the great progress that they're making. So like you said, trade-offs, things to consider. But as Andrew said, those bond earnings are probably the first place that we're going to because you have the most flexibility to put those into those program areas. But again, we'll have a refined proposal recommendation to that March meeting, provide all the information that we cut out of this presentation.
I mean, I do think every single bucket would take more money if we had it. So I want to lift up that the staff are spending at the appropriate rate and they make more money soon, but I can definitely think for every other bucket. We turn out some well-written and wonderful grants every cycle. Same with our local partners who were clamoring for us to open. We prioritize them. There was an immediate first rush. I think we're going to get another wave soon, given local government budget strains. So it's your job to defend that bucket, but I will continue to be in the sights for this one.
My role is just to implement the policy direction that you all provide and give you the information that I have available. I don't pick one or the other. Yes, thank you. I understand it across those.
Councilor Rosenthal and then.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, I think you've developed a great process. You've come up with a good plan. Particularly the process involvement of others is something that I think has been done very well. I always wish it would be done quicker, but we are dependent upon the in-water work and so forth. I always will remain a little sad that we're going to have to get rid of the mature vegetation, and I hope we can reestablish madrones. I have tried it. It's not entirely easy, but I do have one success. So I hope we can reestablish the oak forest. Oaks are a little easier. We have a Graham oaks, which has a lot of oaks. We can spare some of them. We can give them all to Cove. The neighbors want to get rid of some of them. But anyway, my question has to do with the long term. Most people will, once this park is established and created as a nature preserve, most people will assume that it's really part of the Portland Parks system. Most of the uses will be from the neighborhood, and Portland Parks has both trails as well as parks nearby. There's all sorts of parks and waterfront access. To what extent does the passage of the recent bond issue by, or the levy issue by Portland Parks, does that increase or help the ability to get Portland Parks on as a more constructive, more active, and perhaps more funding source partner in this process? Maybe not now in the long term. I mean, I look at Cooper Mountain, for example, as an example where we purchased the property, but then it's managed by THPRD. So is that something that we might be able to explore in the future and then go on to do things that are more regional in nature rather than more specifically Portland?
Thanks, Councilor Rosenthal. Yeah, we do feel confident that the restoration work that we do there will be really nice. It will look different. The renderings look very nice with large trees. That'll take years and time to get there, but yeah, we're excited for that. In terms of the question you're asking about management, that's actually in the current system plan. There's sort of this diagram that asks us, when should we own? When should someone else own and operate? When do we operate? When does someone else operate it? So that's actually some of those are really good conversations that I think something that we could and should have with the city of Portland is, does it make more sense for them to manage long-term? Does it make more sense for us? We've had that, as you mentioned, with Cooper Mountain and Beaverton, which is managed by THPRD, Orango Woods in Hillsborough. Our system used to be the Multnomah County Parks, right? And Metro manages it. Mount Talbert in Happy Valley was NCPRD, and manage. So that question about who makes the most sense to manage a site most effectively for the public, I think are great questions. And again, will be provided a different experience than like a Cathedral Park. I believe Jennifer has engaged the city of Portland's planning team so that they're aware of design things, so that if there ever was a future where they want us to be more involved in that operations and management long term, that they're aware of some of the design elements in those pieces. So I think it's a great conversation.
And I think just following that future planning and the conversation we had just before this, I'm wondering how you're thinking about ongoing operation and maintenance costs. And like, yeah, both the can and will the city play a role? So such an urban setting. And then are there some of the design elements now that we can invest in while we have access to various amounts of money that reduce maintenance costs in the future, whether it's like better materials or things like that. So just, yeah, wondering how we're gonna pay to maintain it for generations.
I can take the first part. So in terms of the site operation, Councilor Wong, thank you. Yeah, site operations and maintenance. As you saw in the presentation, the park construction will take place probably 2030, 2031. So that will be after the current levy expires. So we bring in this question to you all for that about, a levy renewal and or replacement, potentially increasing the rate and factoring in Willamette, Cove, Nature Park, and some of our other sites that we're looking at could be those opportunities. But we are looking at all of our sites. How are we planning for operations and maintenance? How are we reducing sort of what is the right level of service and how to and support that? So yeah, we'll continue to look at that and keep that in mind. Not only but all of our sites, how we're doing long-term maintenance operations. And some of that too is about standards of design. We have similar amenities and all the restrooms are the same. We can manage them the same. We've also looked at where we outsource porta potties and those types of sort of when and where we provide different amenities. But in terms of specific design, Jennifer, I want to talk a little bit about how materials, different things that we're putting in more manageable long term and won't be stolen.
Thanks, Councilor, for the question. We have been working a lot with the maintenance team to look at more durable materials. So that's where we went from our nature trails being to surface for that durability. And then as we looking at different elements, restroom, shelter, like having those be consistent with those standards, and that the maintenance team understands and what they have to use those. This is also some reason why we did the dock in the project. Also, this conversation, the last discussion is like, where are some of those opportunities that you can not have some of our parks that other parks have? So that's one of them, but also the materials potentially compromise the remedy that's in place. So having that moved and then continuing to work with the partners and the mitigation design team on what are the materials that won't compromise the future remedy. So that's a lot of what we get into the space is where we get more detail on design and materials. We're coming back to you some of those stuff. What's going on?
It was you.
Madam Chair, did you call on me?
There we go. Yep.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. And Jennifer, John, Andrew, thanks for this. And thanks for your whole team and the carefulness with which you've approached this property and its importance to many parts of our community. Certainly, I'm excited that people I represent will have close access to it. I appreciate, though, John, you talked about thoughtful consideration of how we treat parks by their nature. And I would not jump to an assumption that this is just a local park in North Portland. We know that our consultation with the tribes has opened up our eyes to the significance to tribal nations. There are precious few public access points at grade level to the Willamette River, actually in the entire region. I would really encourage us not to think of this as a neighborhood park in the Cathedral Park area, but to think of it as a regional nature park. And I'm very excited to see it continue to evolve. Thanks.
Okay. I just had a couple of things, seeing no hands raised at this point. One, love the plan, love the process. Just so happy to see the fencing going away. Fencing and sure. But I think to echo Councilor Lewis, the LG Bloom issue needs to be a priority for us to be a part of and solving. And I guess I'd like to have a little bit more information about this micro versus macro. If we're gonna wait around for the macro, it's gonna take decades. If there's some micro things that we can do to just alleviate some of the worst, or it would be nice to know. So having that kind of study would be helpful to understand what our options are as Metro versus waiting for the entirety of the entire basin there to have some sort of master plan to it. I just trying to get my head around that micro versus macro. I think the most important part of this is the financing, because it is a priority project for the council. And the stability of knowing it's going to have the financing to complete the project. So I guess what I would like to, when you come back with a proposal as soon as possible on the financing, or some scenarios on that, I want to see the scenarios where we upfront the cost and bill our partners to get this moving and not wait for some sort of linear process. If we're going to be linear, this will take another several decades based on what I've been seeing, right? So how do we actually upfront it and then figure it out, back charging our partners for their portion of their costs? And how does that play out? I don't think that it's appropriate to let this drag out based on the way it has been dragging out with partners and who pays for what and how much. So I'd love to see that in the scenarios.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, President Peterson. Just so clear, you're talking about the nature park construction, or are you talking about all the
entirety of the plan? It's all one, I mean, in my head, it's one big project that needs to be finished. And you know, that's how it's gonna be looked at by the public. It's finished or it's not finished, right? And if we can accelerate it by upfronting the money and charging back at the appropriate time, any of that, then that's what I would love to see.
It's good.
In this scenario.
Let's get to that. Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Anything else for the good of the order, Councilor Rosenthal?
Just one quick question. I think you identified a couple of parking areas. Do we have any estimate of what the capacity of this as the nature park would be in terms of visitor use days? In other words, where does it lie on the spectrum? I mean, it's sort of constrained in terms of access. So I'm quite aware of that. So I'm just wondering if we have any estimate at this point in time.
Thanks for the question. We did do a parking study and use on the project. I can share that with you. Happy to. I don't have that, but
Okay.
we do have it. That we work through to come up with parking capacity of the site. So right now we're at 26 spaces, 2 ADA spaces and a bus parking.
Okay.
So, but you'll see, I can send it to you. See that.
Hey, anything else we go to the order? Thank you.
Thank you very
A
much.
lot of work. Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right, counselors, the Chief Operating Officer Communication. Gibson.
I've been looking, I did. It's- I will- I'll do it on Wednesday.
Awesome. Counselor Communications, Counselor Wong.
Thank you, Madam President. We have meet and greets with board members coming up this month. I think all the counselors provided some availability for those evenings. It's just an opportunity to meet some board members and get to know each other and learn about each other's priorities and better to work together. So thanks for making time for that. On a personal note, I also wanted to shout out the Texas Longhorns for defeating the Michigan Wolverines. Counselor Simpson and I made a friendly wager on that Citrus Bowl game, and I unfortunately lost. So I have to provide that shout out. So hook 'em horns.
Counselor Simpson. Anybody else? Any updates? Oh, yes, Lisa.
I hope that she's not, but today is on some events.
Yes. We hope she isn't. She encouraged her to take a day off on her birthday. So happy birthday. All right. With that, we are adjourned. And the next scheduled meeting is January 6th.